Hello, and welcome to Stories by Lumedia Musicworks. I'm your host, Elaine Scholly. I want to start today at the Palace of Versailles, the visually spectacular seat of power for the French monarchy and playground to the aristocratic elite. Don't worry, it got bigger. Versailles began as a small hunting lodge, but by the latter half of the 17th century, it was transformed into a grand palace capable of housing the entire country's government, royal court, its servants, and any important person that wished to do business with the crown. And at the gravitational center of all this, King Louis XIV, the Sun King. All things revolve around him: commerce, government, culture. He's an absolute monarch who controls every inch of society. It's good to be the king. But our series is about women composers. Why then go on and on about Louis XIV? Because there was almost no way for an artist to become anything without him. And our subject today was no exception to that rule. We begin in 1677. All the gossip rags of Paris are aglow over a young woman who is quickly becoming the scene's newest it girl. She is a talented prodigy, beautiful, dedicated, and the king himself has taken an interest in fostering her magnificent abilities. This is the story of Élisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre.
Île de la Cité, 1684. Dearest reader, the time has come to place our bets for the upcoming musical season. Consider the household of wealthy musician and harpsichord maker Claude Jacquet. His young daughter is making a name for herself as a child prodigy who sings the most difficult music on sight. She accompanies herself and others who wish to sing at the harpsichord, which she plays in an inimitable manner. She composes pieces and plays them in any key that we ask. I have told you that for 4 years now, she has been appearing with such extraordinary qualities and is still only 10 years old. How perfect it is, then, that our dear girl is kicking off the season by presenting a small opera of sorts at the home of Louise de Molière, where this marvel of our century plays the harpsichord. Truly, all of Paris is astir to hear its newest rising star, Élisabeth Jacquet.
Élisabeth Jacquet was born on March 17, 1665, on the Île Saint-Louis of the River Seine. This area of Paris was home to important sacred music institutions, royal palaces, and the powerful Musicians' Guild. Coming from a family of well-known musicians and instrument builders, Elizabeth's exceptional talents were obvious at a very young age. At the age of 5, she had her first encounter with the Sun King, Louis XIV. It was her first appearance at the royal court, and she dazzled the attending nobility with her ability to compose and improvise at the keyboard. She was invited back to court several times over the years, each time making quite the impression on the king and the aristocracy. At the age of 14, she was admitted fully to court. The king proclaimed that she should receive a more intense education under the supervision of François and better known as Madame de Montespan. She was the most celebrated royal mistress of Louis XIV, by whom she had 7 children. Elizabeth, as a performer, became hugely popular at court and in the music scene. The papers gushed.
It has been said that the fame of great men ought to be judged always by the means they used to acquire it. How fortunate, then, that Mademoiselle Jacquet possesses a wonderful talent, enabling her to perform preludes and fantasies on the spur of the moment, with extraordinarily varied melodies and chords that enchant all listeners. Oh, dear reader, I fear we may hear less of her in the coming days. Our Sun King is now relocating his court to Versailles, but it appears Mademoiselle Jacquet is choosing to remain in the city, no doubt because of her upcoming nuptials. Let us hope that the handsome Marianne de la Guerre, organist at Paris's renowned Sainte-Chapelle, is worthy of her sacrifice.
Leaving court to stay in Paris might have seemed like a risk, but Élisabeth had already invested a good deal of time under the king's patronage. This was a solid investment. You see, the publishing firm of Leroy and Ballard was the sole music publisher in France. While at court, Élisabeth wasn't paid a salary. Only her education and residency were covered. So in order for her to make a living, she needed to publish. And publish she did. As an absolute monarch, Louis XIV owned and controlled everything. He even had a final say in what music was printed in France. Fortunately for Élisabeth, he was a big fan. In 1687, her first book of harpsichord suites was published. In appreciation of the king's support, she dedicated the collection to him. It was an immediate hit. This is around the time the young rock star Arcangelo Corelli came to Paris. His influence is clear in Élisabeth's suites. Her preludes exude a vibrant Italian style, rich in dissonance and bold timbres. The same influence can also be seen in the works of fellow composer François Couperin. François Couperin, with whom she was no doubt closely acquainted. Get your head out of the gutter. They were family, sort of. Couperin's father's brother was married to Élisabeth's husband's first cousin, which made the two of them absolutely nothing. But go with me here. Élisabeth was part of a great organist family. So were the de la Guerres, and so were the Couperins. The churches where all these organists worked were walking distance from each other. Both composers were strongly influenced by Corelli in their early works, and according to author Hawes, our favorite expert on these two composers, both couldn't stand the local musicians' union. And complaining about the union was every musician's God-given right. Moving on. During the next decade, Élisabeth produced a flurry of extravagant works, a ballet, an opera, and a collection of trio sonatas. If you missed it in that list, I mentioned an opera. Élisabeth Jacquet has the distinction of being the first woman in France to write an opera. Produced in 1694, her opera, Céphale et Procris, was a major undertaking, and she did it all while pregnant. Unfortunately, it wasn't well received. But it's important to realize the societal circumstances that worked against her. For one, France's most celebrated composer to date, Jean-Baptiste Lully, was dead. And there was tremendous hype over Élisabeth being his successor. Furthermore, in his later years, the king had grown tired of big spectacles on stage, so more intimate concert experiences became the trend. Complicating matters, there was a crackdown on opera by the Catholic Church. Pope Clement XI deemed it a sensuous and inappropriate form of entertainment. Didn't know the French ever considered that a bad thing. Today, her opera is considered a great work of art. Sadly, audiences were just not ready for it. She had the unique ability to evoke text through music, which should have made the production a hit. But an overly complicated plot was too much for audiences who wanted toe-tapping show tunes. Hers was an intricate drama set to music. In the end, the production only ran for 5 or 6 performances. Luckily for Élisabeth, this setback didn't end her career as a musician. She was still wildly popular and continued giving performances and writing music. In 1704, however, a series of tragedies stopped everything. Over a span of just a few years, her son dies, followed by her husband, her mother, her father, and brother. She was alone and fell into a deep depression. What pulled her out of this dark place was a letter from a dear friend who wrote, "You are a wonderful composer. You don't have to waste your time on people you don't like. It's okay to be alone. Your talent will keep you from being bored. You don't have to play the game anymore. Just write." Eventually, Élisabeth did write and perform again. In 1707, she published a diverse collection of sonatas for violin. This gives her work the distinction of being the first French examples of sonatas for violin and continuo. Again, she dedicated her work to the king, writing, "I have striven even harder, sire, to deserve your approbation, which has always meant everything to me." And following the sonata's debut performance for the king, the press was once again singing her praises.
Dinner being over, His Majesty spoke to Mademoiselle de la Guerre in a most gracious manner. After having praised her sonatas extensively, he said to her that they could not be compared to any other such works. Mademoiselle de la Guerre could not have received higher praise, for these words revealed that the king not only found her music to be most fine, but also to be original, a quality that today is extremely rare.
Elizabeth would retire from public life in 1717, passing away in 1729. Both the public and artistic community mourned her. Francois Couperin published his first set of harpsichord pieces the year that Elizabeth died. Our friend Arthur, hello again Arthur, Arthur Haas has surmised that Couperin's suite in D major is dedicated to her, not in words, but artistically. The majority of the suite is not in his own unique style, but almost entirely in hers. And each movement seems to describe an element of her character. In fact, one movement is titled with her nickname, La Terpsichore, or the Muse. Looking at her legacy, one can't ignore the fact that Elizabeth was a woman who made a career for herself in music. Certainly, it was outside the norms of society for a woman to do so. Her legacy is, first and foremost, her compositions. They stand out and are ranked as equal, if not better, than many of her contemporaries. But there's another legacy. Through her stardom, she broke a bit of the glass ceiling for women. After her retirement, female musicians were given official posts both at court and in the royal chapel. Luckily for her friend Couperin, they were members of his family. Without Elizabeth, none of this would have been possible. And now for the bonus fact. Elizabeth kept her name. In all her publications, she neither signed with her married name nor under an assumed male name. She always used her maiden name. A small move for a woman in the 21st century, but an unheard of one for the 18th century. So perhaps we should remember her that way, as Élisabeth Jacquet.